From Washington, D.C., I'm Allister. This is Washington Watch, a look at your weekly roundup of the top stories from the United States and beyond. Here are your headlines. H-1B hiring under scrutiny. The Trump administration reportedly investigating bias in the skilled worker visa program, which they say allegedly discriminates U.S. citizens in favor of foreign workers. Separately, changes to student visas could also be in the works, with limits on duration of stay in the United States.
He wants to use it as a kind of sword to sort of punish India for not agreeing for his tariffs. Then he can use it.
An exclusive interview with former Finance Secretary Subhash Garg on the twists and turns of India's stalled trade talks with the US. This week saw the US increase duties on India for buying Russian oil. It brings total tariffs to a punishing 50%. US Vice President J.D. Vance says he's ready to step into the nation's highest office if a terrible tragedy were to strike President Donald Trump. In an interview, Vance stressed that his current role has prepared him for the job while dismissing speculation about Trump's health. He called the 79-year-old president incredibly healthy and said he fully expects him to serve his entire term.
Give your kids an extra hug and kiss today. We love you, Fletcher. You'll always be with us. Give your kids.
Families in Minneapolis left reeling after a gunman opened fire inside a church, leaving 2 young children dead and injuring 18 others. Police say the gunman was obsessed with the idea of killing kids. However, officials say a definitive motive may not be known. The shooter died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound.
She was not aligned with the president's mission to make America healthy again. And the secretary asked her to resign. She said she would, and then she said she wouldn't. So the president fired her, which he has every...
The director of the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has been sacked. Susan Monares reportedly resisted changes to vaccine policies suggested by her boss, Health Secretary Robert Kennedy Jr. She was in the role for just 1 month and has been replaced by acting director Jim O'Neill, a former Silicon Valley tech investor. Our top story, increased scrutiny now on H-1B visas. According to a report, a conversation that a Justice Department official had with the media outlet InfoWars, the DOJ is now going to investigate a certain alleged misuse or abuse of H-1B visas. The allegation that various companies, IT companies for example, using those H-1B visas and allegedly prioritizing foreign nationals instead of Americans. And also, we're hearing this week that the Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, also saying that an overhaul of H-1B and green cards, the entire process, could come sooner rather than later. Let's take a closer look at this story. We're joined by our guest, immigration attorney Hiba Anwar. She joins us from Arlington, Virginia. Hiba, we've heard about these rumblings of the government not being happy with these hiring practices as far as H-1B visas go. We heard Howard Lutnick's comments as well. What exactly is this DOJ probe going to look at?
So to be quite honest with you, I don't think that this DOJ probe is necessarily anything new. Government agencies have historically investigated, employer hiring practices and have also focused on the H-1B visa. And I think that for folks who are familiar with the H-1B visa process, we know that there are certain guardrails and steps that are put in place to ensure that the program is not abused on a large-scale basis. And so I think that they will, based on what they're purporting, take a look at whether or not the H-1B visa is being used in any sort of a discriminatory way. But I think most folks who are familiar with the process and who handle H-1B visas will tell you that the vast majority of the time, the H-1B visa and the overall program is not used in a discriminatory way and is not misused for discriminatory hiring practices.
Right. But the rhetoric really, Hiba, is getting stronger by the day. We also heard Florida Governor Ron DeSantis calling it a scam. So things are, in a way, getting serious here. So are you expecting, though, this overhaul, really, of how H-1Bs are going to be handed out? And what are those changes that we might see?
So what I believe Commerce Secretary Lutnick is referring to is a new proposed rule. It's not final, but it's proposed. And what it seeks to do is revamp the way the H-1B lottery system is conducted in a way that gives individual applicants that are earning higher salaries a higher chance at actually being selected in the lottery. I do think that there is a bit of a divide in terms of whether or not this rule is actually going to be passed. Proponents of the rule are obviously going to argue that the rule makes it to where the top earners and the most highly skilled are actually being selected for the lottery. And critics of the rule are saying that this is almost entirely excluding the best and the brightest recent graduates who would otherwise be participating in the H-1B lottery from having a fair shot at being selected. And so, where I think that this debate really heats up is whether or not one views the ability of the United States to attract the best and brightest talent from around the world as a benefit to the U.S. economy, to U.S. companies, to U.S. academic institutions. And so I think that, this is actually going to be an issue that we're going to be watching very closely, because this would really change the face of how the H-1B lottery is conducted. And I think that there is a lot of growing concern for folks who are not necessarily being underpaid, but who are being paid on a slightly lower end of an overall salary range because they're recent graduates, and what that does to their chances of being selected in the lottery.
Mm-hmm. Lisa, Hiba, beg your pardon, Hiba, stay with us. We're trying to get your reaction on this next story as well. We saw developments here this week as far as the Trump administration mulling perhaps changes to limitations of stay being put on student visas, looking at a 4-year term here instead of continuous renewals and an unlimited stay, perhaps also looking at changes as far as visa rules go on journalist visas, looking at restrictions as little as 240 days and just 90 days for Chinese nationals. Now, Hiba, how is this 4-year limit going to really work for students as far as this new proposal goes? We know that there's going to be a 30-day period for public consultation to people to give comments. But really, if a student is doing a PhD, for example, he's going to, or she's going to have to be here for more than 4 years, maybe even 6.
Yeah, I think the concern here is that assuming that this rule actually becomes a final rule, then what this does is it imposes additional limitations on foreign students and adds additional restrictions by eliminating the ability for the foreign student to remain for the duration of their program, and in exchange, limiting them to a fixed 4-year period. But it's important to take a look at this in terms of everything else that's been happening, as opposed to just looking at this in a vacuum. There has been a lot of change and a lot of policy and a lot of rhetoric as it applies to foreign students. And my concern here is that just by the fact that this rule is being proposed, even if it doesn't go through, this is just going to be another reason for foreign students to think twice before selecting the United States as the location where they want to pursue their studies. And foreign students are a core component to the success of U.S. academic institutions. So I think that this is all just kind of painting a larger picture of the United States being less welcoming of a place to foreign students. And then we kind of have to think about what this looks like in terms of the trickle-down effects for companies, because university recruiting is a core component of the talent pool that a lot of these companies hire from, right? And so anything that's going to either add restrictions and limitations or anything that's going to be perceived as another unfriendly policy, I think at this point is problematic.
Indeed. Hiba Anwar, we'll leave it there for now. Thanks very much for your insight. Hiba Anwar, immigration attorney, joining us here on Washington Watch. In other news now, an Indian truck driver is causing mixed emotions, extreme emotions across the United States. This is after he was charged with vehicular homicide for allegedly killing 3 people when making an illegal U-turn on a Florida highway. The incident has intensified a national debate over immigration and safety. Here's more.
This is Harjinder Singh, an Indian-American, 28-year-old truck driver from Punjab. Today, he stands accused of causing a crash in Florida that killed 3 people in the United States. Investigators say Singh attempted an illegal U-turn. His truck jackknifed across the Florida Turnpike. A minivan slammed into the trailer. 3 lives were lost instantly. Singh remains behind bars. A global petition urging Governor Ron DeSantis to grant him clemency has now gathered more than 2.8 million signatures. Supporters insist the collision was a tragic accident, not a crime deserving vehicular manslaughter charges. Florida officials call him a fugitive who must face justice.
We're here today because of tragedy. 3 lives lost. That gentleman, that thug, fled back. Ultimately, we're going to make sure that justice is served.
Just weeks before the accident, Singh was stopped in New Mexico for speeding. What followed was an exchange that showed another side. A nervous, polite driver trying to learn the system.
Is instead of writing it for 60 and a 45, I'm just going to write it for 55. The fine is only $25. Thank you.
Maybe in that this my ticket and my license, or how many years?
Don't quote me on this. I think a ticket will stay anywhere from 5 to 7 years, depending on what state you're in.
New Mexico State Police released this body cam video showing Singh speaking limited English with the trooper. After speculation over whether he understood English at all, the footage is being seen as a key development. The video has fueled debate in Washington, where officials say truck drivers must be able to read road signs and speak English. Critics argue states like California and New Mexico have been lax in enforcing that rule.
Washington, California, and New Mexico. We are going to give these states 30 days to come into compliance with truck drivers speaking proficiently the English language, or we're going to look at federal funding.
For Singh, the road that once promised freedom now leads only to confinement. His fate lies not just in the hands of the courts, but in a nation divided between compassion and punishment. For the 30,000 Indian truckers in America, Singh's story feels personal. The incident has prompted the US to suspend visas for foreign commercial truck drivers. The open road gave them opportunity, pride, and a future. But now, after this crash, a visa freeze threatens to take it all away. Thousands of dreams are idling in uncertainty. Some Indian American communities are standing behind Singh, saying he made a terrible mistake. Others insist he is no victim and the law must take its course. For President Trump, this case has become the centerpiece of a wider crackdown on foreign truck drivers. Ridhima Kedia's report for NDTV World.
New Delhi is sticking by its resolve to buy Russian crude. This after additional tariffs were imposed this week. The US slapped punitive tariffs of 25% over India's purchases of discounted Russian oil, which Trump says is fueling the war in Ukraine. The move raises US duties on Indian goods to 50%, amongst the highest in the world. So what would happen if India stops buying Russian crude? A research report from CLSA says it would spike demand since India is the world's largest oil importer, sending global crude prices to $100 a barrel. Separately, the report also says the benefit of importing Russian oil stands only at $2.5 billion a year, as opposed to estimates of $10 to $25 billion a year. This flies in contrast to comments from the Trump administration, which says India has been profiteering from cheap Russian oil. For more on the story, we're joined exclusively by former Indian Finance Secretary Subhash Garg. Mr. Garg, thank you very much for your time here on Washington Watch. Mr. Garg, that CLSA research report says there that the benefit to India really, as far as cheap Russian oil goes, is far less than what has been portrayed previously, $2.5 billion as opposed to estimates of 10 to 25 billion. That kind of debunks Trump's claims. But on the other hand, I'd like to know if this still makes sense for India to be buying Russian oil because it's not as cheap as before. Do you think that if we stop, it would be caving into Trump and we'd be bullied further?
I think this computations of what actually the gains are is a very difficult thing to do. The easiest way probably the people will do is that on a day, what is the global or Dubai price for us, and on that day, what is the Russian price to us? And that discount is something which is taken as a kind of gain. Again, there is a question, I think that is what CLSA report also brings out, that this headline discount over the price and the landed cost to India, taking into account the shipping, insurance, and other kind of costs. So, in case we are actually able to compute the landed cost vis-a-vis Dubai to Russian oil, that is what should be taken as the real gain. That unfortunately is not easily available. So then that is where the estimates or the guesstimates take over. And someone will tell you that it's 10 billion, 25 billion. They don't do it in the annual context, while the CLSA report tells you about the annual context. And also that this is going down over the years and it's reducing. But all in all, so if Trump wants to use it as a kind of sword to sort of punish India for not agreeing for his tariffs, then he can use it. You can put any number; it doesn't make any difference.
Right. But Mr. Garg, which version are you buying if, so to speak, Russian oil is not as cheap as before?
At this moment, to my mind, it seems to be only about $3 to $4 per barrel as the effective discount, and any reduction in the price of crude which buy is worth it. And therefore, India, which is buying Russian oil, within the parameters set by the international sort of community, so to say, that you can buy Russian oil within the price cap, which has been set by the global community. I think that's not violative of any sort of international agreement or understanding. So that is what India should continue to buy. It's the objection is wrong. The objection should be removed rather than India be asked to do something which is not violative of any international understanding.
Mr. Garg, should India be walking away from these talks? Because if India earns about 11% of goods sent overseas as far as GDP goes, this is not including services, compared to, say, Vietnam, whose GDP earns about 85% of exports from sending goods overseas. Do you think that perhaps that India should maybe call it a day right now, maybe momentarily? There would be pain for sure, but it would not be insurmountable, so to speak, looking at those numbers.
Effectively, India has walked away. Whether we formally acknowledge it or not, effectively, India has walked away from doing the deal with Trump administration. In any case, no one can do any export or any trade when the tariffs are 50%. At that level, hardly any trade can take place. So should India officially close it? If that is what you mean to say, I don't think in the international negotiations you should ever close the doors for negotiations. You should continue hoping that sanity prevails on the other side at some point of time. What I also personally feel is that India should do some revisiting of its stances. Should also look for whether what it's trying to save actually is worth saving or not. See, for example, let's say agriculture, right? And we say that we will not sort of open up for the GM oil or dairy products and all. If you drill down deeply, you would find that actually the farmers' interests are not hurt by if we start sort of rethinking about this. It's consumer preference only which comes in the way of consuming GM oil. So Indians here, the Indian consumer should also have even a choice. You can put a label on the imported American GM oil that this is from the GM seeds kind of thing. Whoever is not
Okay.
interested doesn't buy. So that is where I suggest we should do some rethinking rather taking very inflexible and obstinate position.
Mr. Garg, our Prime Minister, Prime Minister Modi, is meeting with the Chinese President Xi Jinping this weekend in Tianjin. What needs to happen there in order to soften the blow, really, from this Trump betrayal?
See, this is a bit unfortunate and more difficult thing to do it. We have had a relationship of enormous distrust with China and also enormous import dependence on China for all the new industrial economy goods, whether it's computers, semiconductors, cells, solar cells, EVs, batteries, and things like that. That we can't do without importing from China. The choice before us has been, and this is not now, this has been there for quite so many years, at least for a decade, is that should we permit Chinese companies to make investment into India to manufacture these goods, or should we only allow imports? I think our position that we have excluded Chinese investment in these areas has actually come to hurt. So in this situation, new situation which has got created now, if we can think up of opening Chinese investment into these things in India, that perhaps may be even in the long-term interest of the country and will reduce dependence on Chinese imports. But I don't see at this moment the Indian policymakers being ready for that. So if they don't get ready for this kind of departure or pivot against the earlier practice, not much will come out of the Chinese.
Mr. Garg, there have been calls for a boycott of US goods in India. How effective really is that? Because it's hard to see someone, say, giving up WhatsApp, which is, of course, owned by Meta, also not using iPhones if someone is an diehard iPhone fan, or for that matter, McDonald's. We forget that many of these franchisees, for example, in Noida, might be owned by an Indian businessman. So, in effect, it's actually hurting Indians in return.
There is no point. It's only a small fringe of Indians who talk about these things. It will. We did it to boycott Chinese product after that Galwan kind of thing. Nothing came out of it. Americans are far more integrated into the Indian consumption and the services in use. So it's an impossible thing to do it. I don't think we should go on that way at all. It's insane.
Subhash Garg, former Indian Finance Secretary, thank you very much for your time here on Washington Watch. In other news now, Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook is suing the Trump administration after she was fired by US President Trump over alleged mortgage fraud. Now, this is an ongoing battle between President Trump, the Trump administration, and the Fed, bringing into question the Fed's independence. Now, Trump has accused Cook of mortgage fraud. As we mentioned, the case now before a federal judge could reshape the balance of power between the White House and America's central bank. Investors are watching closely, and concerns that political pressure on the Fed could spill over into global markets. And here's why all of that really matters to India. Now, if the Fed's independence is compromised, investors could lose confidence in the US dollar, the world's reserve currency. They will park their money in safe haven assets like gold, potentially avoiding riskier emerging markets such as India. If a politicized Fed cuts interest rates too aggressively, the US dollar will slide. Since the rupee trades heavily against the dollar, this dollar depreciation will cause the rupee to appreciate, and that has an impact on exports. The US is India's largest trading partner, remember. A stronger rupee will make Indian goods even more expensive for US buyers. A double whammy, really, given Indian products face those 50% tariffs already. And here's another scenario. Investors may rush to sell dollars and park money in India, which could see inflows of hot money. But that hot money in India can leave as soon as it may come on changing global sentiment. And what would that do? Well, sudden outflows can then weaken the rupee, stoking inflation. India depends heavily on crude imports. Crude is priced in dollars. A weakened rupee will make crude more expensive to purchase. This will send energy costs soaring, making manufacturing more expensive, basically everything more expensive. Transport, clothing, power bills, and the most basic of all, food. Let's take a look now at our final story here as far as crime rate in Washington, D.C. goes. This is after President Trump brought in the National Guard in order to federalize, which many are saying, federalize the U.S. Capitol. Now, Trump, of course, is saying that the amount of crime has been reduced and has fallen sharply. Trump highlighted a rare murder-free stretch in the city, but critics argue whether this crackdown signals lasting progress or short-term political theater. Let's take a quick look at how the numbers add up. This is from the DC Police. Overall crime dropped 23% during a 15-day period in August when compared to the previous 2 weeks. If you look at individual parameters like homicide, these crimes also fell by a quarter over the same period. Assault with a dangerous weapon saw a drop. Same goes for property crimes along with robbery and vehicle theft. However, there was an increase in sex abuse crimes. Some observers say the actual numbers could go up as crimes are often reported many days or weeks later. That's it for Washington Watch. I'm Allister D'Souza here in Washington, D.C.